Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning, good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. And today, we're going to have so much fun. And I say that every time. I know I do. But we're talking with one of my favorite people about one of my favorite things, and that's the University of Colorado, but just a little bit about University of Colorado. I promise. We're actually going to talk more with my guest about how he got to where he is today, because it is such a fascinating route that he has taken. And I just love hearing his story. So please join me in welcoming Robert Garelick to our program today. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you.
Well, let me tell people just a little bit about you, and then we'll jump into this. So Robert Garelick has a passion for great causes and philanthropy. He joined the CU Advancement Team in 2017 after working as an executive director for several years in the healthcare space. Robert, who is a graduate of University of Colorado, the School of Arts and Sciences, also owned his own business and ran an international manufacturing business for 10 years in the private sector. He spent his formative years in the UK, but was also fortunate to have worked in many other countries throughout his career. Robert has been proud to call Boulder home for more than 20 years. So yay, go Buffs! But let's kind of start and go back to at the beginning, because you have had a varied career in many different countries. So tell us about how it is that you finally ended up where you are right now.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Delighted to be here. So I grew up in England, and my parents from immigrant families. And often, as it is with immigrant families, you go into business, a small business. My parents owned a convenience store, liquor store, after the war, World War II, and they actually met in 1950. And then during that time, my father, who'd been a carpenter as a kid growing up, he left school very young at 11 and worked in his father's cabinet making business. He started a shop fitting business where in England there's a lot of retail, small retail stores, a lot of shopkeepers. And he built that into a company that built trade show booths. And it ended up being all around the world, especially as he spoke German and Russian and Polish. So I went and visited his business. I worked as the receptionist when the receptionist was out, on vacation. I always worked in the business as a kid. Then I started working in a jewelry store after work. It was a relative of a friend of mine owned a jewelry store. And then after school, I wasn't quite ready for college, and I worked in a very big and retail jewelry store in London. During that time, I also had the opportunity, I knew the opportunity was coming up because of some dual citizenship situations, that I could move to Israel. So it was very cold and wet in England. And a friend of mine who went to high school with me in junior high, we've been speaking about it, and it just seemed more appealing at that age. You make very unusual decisions at 18, 19. But,
right, yeah. Things you look back later and think, oh, okay.
On a whim, let's go to Israel. So we moved to Israel and signed up for a study work program where we'd study a little bit during the day and then work on a kibbutz, a collective settlement. Staying for 7 years, and I did my army service there because of my citizenship situation in the infantry, and also worked in a lot of agriculture because the place we lived in, where I also met my wife who'd come to study, my wife's from Boulder. She came for a year but stayed with me for almost 7 years in Israel. And there I worked as a chef. I worked in a picking bananas. I ran a fish farm in a sense, or helped run a little fish farm that we had there. It was very different agricultural work, chicken hatchery. So all that time, very, very different work. We made a decision at some point to move back to the States to be closer to her family in Colorado, which was lovely. It was a paradise, as those of you who've been to Boulder know. And we came to Colorado, and I started to think about going back to school, which I did. But in the interim, I needed to make a living. So Actually, the very first job I got in Colorado was selling cars because it was a job that was plentiful, and I did it for a short period of time to get some cash flow, as you're starting your life. Very soon after that, my clever wife said to me, I think computers will be the next thing. And I said, yeah, you're probably right. So I found a job in a company that they used to call them white box computers. You would take the components and put them together. And they had a small service department, but the service side of it interested me. So I took someone from that business, a young guy who was very good at computers, and we started a small service company. And then a third guy joined us, another young guy from New Jersey, came and joined us, who'd been working with us in that company. And we started a company called Aardvark. And at the beginning, we started in my basement. And we obviously wanted to become a little larger. And at that time, computer networking was becoming quite popular. And the first computer network we did was honestly 3 computers. And then, it grew and grew and grew. We're fortunate enough to then move into office space in Boulder, Colorado. Then we opened a small office in Denver, a small office in Colorado Springs. And then we bought a building in Broomfield, Colorado, which isn't too far from Boulder. And probably for about 10 years, I stayed in that business. And I decided after 10 years, it was time to change. Sometimes you want to change. I exited the business. It was a wonderful business. We had a lot of small business clients. We did have some big clients as well, but I think our small business clients, lots of CPAs, lots of lawyers, lots of sole practitioners, insurance brokerage. And they obviously in those days would have a small computers put together, to make a network so they could print together or share files.
And they were wired together type of network.
Yeah, exactly. So initially we were really physically wired. For the oldsters on the listening in, we were very involved in something called Novell and another lovely named product called Lantastic, which I think is a great name. And then we moved into the Cisco world, and we actually had a telephone division where we did the early voice over IP telephone systems. So we were expanding, and we probably at some point had 50 or so people, but we started out with just the 3 of us, and it grew. It was lovely. And it was very old fashioned from an advertising perspective. We called it Aardvark because it had 2 A's.
So you were at the start of the Yellow Pages.
Yellow Pages, or I think also the Chamber of Commerce was huge for us.
Yeah.
So I was a big Chamber of Commerce guy. My business partners were more on the techie side. I was the marketing and sales guy. And I would go out and schmooze and find us a network and leads groups in Boulder, Denver, Colorado Springs, South Metro area of Denver. And so I was at 3 or 4 of those events a week. And that's really how we grew, being in the Yellow Pages. And then we had a very funny habit. We made a cartoon out of a character called Aaron the Aardvark. We'd have him on top of a Christmas tree or with a pilgrim's hat for Thanksgiving. And every day in the local paper, the Daily Camera, we'd have a small ad. And in those days, they had an interesting concept of advertising that they referred to as TOMA, top of mind awareness, which is an expression I use to this day for all kinds of business and marketing. Instead of having a big ad once a week that we had, this young rep, David, said to me, what do you think about just doing a tiny ad every day and then your presence is there every day? And we did it, and it sort of worked for us. We tried to sort of blanket advertise as much as we could and get out and about. Just like any business, you got to find lots of different ways to grow. And that's how we grew. After that, I took some time to work with a web company because I wanted to know about early website development. Did some consulting for a company in Denver. And then during that time, I met up with someone who I'd known from the telephone side of the business. And he had a telephone business, but they also had a manufacturing business in their family in Denver. And that's how I got into the manufacturing. But I suppose the transition to what I do now happened at the time of my computer company. We were feeling fortunate, and we started doing some charity work. And my family had always been involved in charities, and I was interested. I worked at the homeless shelter for many, many years, cooking, and then doing outreach in the community to bring blankets and socks with my kind friend Larry. And for maybe 13 years, we did that. So we were always into charity, and we would put computers together for charities so they could have them for their galas. And that's how I got involved in JDRF, Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. And my youngest son has type 1 diabetes, so it was great that I got involved. And eventually I became board president and development director and all of those things on a basis. but I found that I was good at making the ask, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Dreaded ask, which isn't dreaded. It's not like a car deal when you
Mm-hmm.
sign on the bottom line. It's more of a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started gravitating towards that. And at some point after having, and we can talk about international travel as well, but after having traveled abroad and worked in many, many countries, fortunate to start reseller network in places like Turkey and Dubai and England. I had an opportunity to apply for a position at JDRF, at the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, and I was fortunate enough to become the executive director, and we were fortunate enough to grow. And that's how I sort of got into the nonprofit as a career, not as a hobby.
Right, right. And so you've been at CU and it's funny, when I read 2017, I thought, no, that's not right. Because it's hard for me to believe that we have actually only known each other for 3 years. And part of that is because you've come to Atlanta fairly often pre-COVID. And you're kind enough that we have dinner and we get together every time that we're here. But you said something a second ago that I really keyed on, and that's that you build relationships before you do the ask. And of course, that works great in the nonprofit world, but in the for-profit world, that's the step that so many people skip. They meet you, and you're trying to get your hand back from that initial handshake, and they're trying to draw it back to get into your wallet. And so it is about building those relationships.
Yeah, someone wise once said to me, always do this before you do this. So, also, I'm a chatty guy, so I have to be a very active listener. 2 ears, 1 mouth, try and use them proportionally. That's my weakness, I think. But I think that relationship building in the nonprofit is very similar to, as you say, relationship building in business. So I would say that my finest compliment in the computer business was we had this very sort of tough, hard-nosed lawyer we dealt with, and he would just call me to chat. And he billed by the hour very much. He's that guy, right? And he's a wonderful man, but he's a very aggressive business person, and he has a great skill, and he feels that he should bill for that, and that's very true. But he would just call me for a chit chat, which I saw as a very lovely compliment. And it isn't a notion of knowing when someone's birthday is or their kid's birthday is. I think that's a little trite. It's lovely to know that.
Right.
I think really knowing about, you and your family, and knowing for you and Tom, for example, that beagles, your dogs, are a very large part of your life. Not just sort of platitudes about that. I think it's important for me to go and read about that so that we can have fun and interesting conversation about it. And I always learn something, right? What do I know about beagles? I knew Snoopy, right? So
Well, and Tom and I were talking about this. We went out to dinner with you, met you several times before you actually said that you would like to talk to us about becoming a major donor. And the way you did it was, certainly we didn't feel like we were pressured or anything like that. It was just, this is my job. I need to ask. And one of the things that we definitely felt was not pressured. We knew if we said no, wouldn't change anything. We'd still have dinner with you. But because we were comfortable with you, then we could have those discussions. And we laugh that, we're considered major donors, and we're major donors if we die today. That's the big thing, because there's those life insurance policies that are floating around out there. But, it really was something where, you definitely built that relationship. And like I said, we knew if we said no or not at this time, that was okay. Absolutely. And again, so many people totally forget that, it's, well, if you're not going to do business with me, you're done. I'm never going to talk to you again.
Well, there is that notion, of course, in business and in nonprofit / higher education, where it is good to know if someone doesn't have an interest. I mean, there is that notion, of course, but I think that, and sometimes I'll meet people and they'll say, I know you're on the financial side, and it's really not something for me. And I say, well, you do this. Could you be a mentor for our students? Could you engage in other ways?
Right.
It's not comfortable. And often those people will say yes, and eventually they actually will give money. So I think the relationship, I'm not a transactional guy. It's just, I don't think I could be in a business where someone comes in and they buy something and they leave and you don't see them ever again. I'm interested in repeat business, so to speak. So it has to be a relationship. In your case, and thank you so much for being so kind to the University of Colorado and other things as well. I think, Beagle Rescue, whatever, the other things you're interested in. Whenever someone says to me, oh, I love giving to the MS Society, I'm like, well, that's a very wonderful thing. Thank you for doing that.
Right.
And, unfortunately, we have a family member impacted or whatever it might be. Of course, everyone has something in their life. I believe that people who really want to give sometimes don't know that they want to give because they don't know that there's very interesting vehicles. It's not always about cash. As you say, life insurance policies, IRAs at a certain age, you have to, deplete some of those funds in there. In fact, charitable remainder trusts and donor advice funds, there's thousands of ways of giving without writing a check, real estate, et cetera, but we can get into that if that's a question later. But I think more importantly, you can't just enter into a very intimate conversation. If I go to a life insurance salesperson, I say, hey, I want to get long-term care or life insurance, they know that that's what the relationship is all about. So with that in mind, you can have that conversation right away. But I think in the nonprofit world, that's something you have to get into. It's very personal, it's very intimate. And I think that, you have to really be careful how you get into that.
Right.
So
it's interesting because it is, it's as you said, it's very delicate, because many people, most people have something that they're passionate about, whether it's, the earth, whether it's animals, whether it's childhood diseases, something. And more than likely, there's a personal reason. You mentioned that you were involved with the Diabetes Association because of your son. I worked for the American Cancer Society, and I applied there specifically because my grandmother had cancer. And then when I got my diagnosis, I told people, oh dear, I know just enough to be dangerous. But I also knew the resources and things that I could turn to. But we find those things and sometimes you can expand on them. But of course, one of the things that people don't always think about is their university. We all see these behemoth organizations that, have these gazillion-dollar football programs. And yes, I love my Buffs and Ralphie is there over your shoulder. There are schools that are certainly known for their philanthropic programs. That one of the other things that CU is obviously well known for is aerospace. Yes. More astronauts have come from there than any other university. Places like the Ivy Leagues are clearly known for something totally different. But we never stop to think that they could benefit from us at some point. I've been a volunteer for CU for 25-ish years. And I did it specifically because I wanted to meet the other people who were on the board of the organization that I was a part of. Sure. For me, it was all about networking. Now, obviously it helped that I was an alum, but yeah, it was like, now those are people I want to meet. And, and I have been involved for, ever since then.
Yeah, and I think that unfortunately, from a university perspective, I think in Colorado, for example, people assume that we have bags of money because we're a large organization and a public university. Unfortunately, probably under 4% is what the state contributes every year.
Yeah, even though it's a state university, it gets very little funding from the state of Colorado.
Yeah, we have to act like a business. That is getting donations, and often donations are for research, and they're often for kids who otherwise couldn't afford to go to the University of Colorado or any university. And obviously, we want to have a workforce for your business people out there throughout the world. We want to have an educated workforce, and sort of an eclectic workforce. So in arts and sciences, we love that we're very interdisciplinary, that we're now working on a program for entrepreneurial sort of side of the arts and humanities. So if you decide you're a fine artist, you also have to be able to sell your wares.
Right.
You have to understand
how to be able to read a contract.
Yeah, look at a P&L, look at a balance sheet, exactly right. So we're working on that side quite a bit more. But occasionally you'll have students, not occasionally, unfortunately, quite often you'll have students from homes where they're first-time college goers, or just people who cannot afford the cost of education these days. And we obviously love supplementing that if we can with donations. On the other side, there's research, whether it be scientific research, whether it be non-scientific research, or teaching people about theater, about dance. We actually have one of the world's most renowned ceramics programs at the University of Colorado.
I had no idea.
Yeah, so So there's lots of ways of doing this. And again, when we meet people, you can't just blurt that stuff out. It's got to be about what they are in, just like in any business. You know, if I bring to them sort of a widget, I say, oh, I've invented something for your phone. Well, I don't know if that's interested in or not. If you have a relationship, you might know that.
Right.
Or at least have gathered that information.
Right. Well, and even if they say no or not at this time, if you've developed that relationship, it's exactly what you were saying before, top of mind. Because then not only are you still top of mind there, they're listening to other conversations. So they might hear somebody say, I need to buy a widget and I don't know where to buy that widget. And you go, Robert sells widgets. You know?
Or he might even know someone who has a widget if it's not the widget he has. In the manufacturing world, we made machines for the sign industry. And signs that you'd see above Starbucks, the channel letters, and we'd bend in metal and the plastic that went around those signs, and we'd sell the neon back in the day. And so we had resellers for that machinery. If you obviously are making a sign for Wells Fargo and you're only making one, you could probably do that by hand. But if once Wachovia sells to Wells Fargo and you have to make 900 signs, you know, 2 for each branch in, you know, 3 months, you need automation. So we provided that automation. And when we dealt with resellers both in the States and abroad, everyone was very different culturally. So I might have a German reseller. He's going to work very differently than a Turkish reseller. Right. So you have to have a relationship because you have to understand how these people tick. And that makes it much more interesting for when you're dealing with them. You learn a lot about them. It's fun. Get to travel to fun places too, of course. And a really extreme example is when I dealt in Japan. You know, it's a very different thing culturally. When I was working with a guy in the UK, his machine came in a big crate, his first machine that he was going to use as a demo. And we ripped it open and Japan, they put on white gloves and they opened the box very carefully. And the first day we had these giant machines that weighed whatever they weighed, they made covers for them in cloth so that they would look tidy and neat. And that was part of the culture in Japan. And that was very important to them. So I couldn't schlep it out of the box and drag it down the ramp we'd made. It had to be done in their way. And they wanted to know about every screw and every nut and every bolt. I sort of knew that going in. It didn't mean I wasn't like, oh, come on.
Yeah, come on. We want to see this. You know, and it's interesting that you mentioned culture because I think because of the pandemic, we are expanding. You know, obviously it depends on what we do, what our product or service is, but we're expanding who we're at least connected with. And I don't know if you knew this, I taught courses at Metro State there on the Auraria campus. And it was obviously communication courses. And one of the things that we taught was about culture. And we had a young man who was from Japan in the class. And so we had him explain things. And one of the things that he talked about was this little thing right here, your business card.
Yes.
And, you know, and he said, you know, if you hand someone your business card in the United States, typically they don't even look at it and they go, right? Or they stuff it in their pocket or they put it in a book or whatever. It's just because they're saving it for later. That is a huge show of disrespect in Japan, as you know, because this is an extension of the person. And so he told us, he said, you know, someone of Asian, you know, culture hands you their business card, you take it, you look at it, and then you put it in a place of honor. So you're not stuffing it in your pocket or whatever. And right there, I mean, that he said that can make a huge difference with how somebody decides to do business with you. And, you know, it is different, especially, you know, in many cultures, male and female. You know, that is one of the big things. I still remember when we moved here to Atlanta, we had to buy some furniture, bigger house. So we needed some new furniture and we went and there, the owner of the store was one of the cultures that has a different view of women. You know, that's just the way their culture is. And when the deal was done, I put out my hand and he wouldn't shake it. Oh, and he shook my husband's hand and he said, I would not disrespect your husband by shaking your hand. Now, I wasn't quite sure I bought that, but it was like, okay, you know, and
right?
Yeah, you know, it was like, okay, whatever. But yeah, you know, as business people, it's so important to research those things and even colors. You know, I remember learning things about, you know, this color in one culture means this thing. And in another culture, you know, like green typically is one of those things that, especially say here, signifies money.
Yeah.
But in other cultures, it might signify something very different. So, if you're reaching out to people and working with them in other countries, hello, Google it and just check those things out.
Yeah, so two quick things about that. That's wonderful. Your great observations. And I noticed in Japan, I fortunate to ask someone a smart question before making a foolish mistake, although I make many foolish mistakes every day.
Oh, we all do.
On the business card, also, you don't want to write, when we go, oh, what's your
Right.
phone number? In effect, that is writing on someone's face.
Yes. Yeah. So you're taking a note to say, remember to call them on Friday. And in fact, what you did was insult them.
Yeah, and with the internet, we can research all of these things. There are organizations that help with these cultural. I took a lot of trips. I actually went to this company that existed in Boulder at the time where you could take a course on sort of the culture.
Right.
Yesterday, we had a fun thing. I'm with some of my colleagues on my team. We're taking a French class together just for fun. Another lovely advantage of being at a university. And we thought about something. When you go to France or Belgium or French-speaking country, the pharmacies always have a green cross. So our French teacher lives in Colorado. When her mother came here, she said, "Oh, great, it's a pharmacy." It would be a dispensary.
Wrong green cross.
Exactly. So a green cross suddenly means two different things. In France, it means a pharmacy, and here it means a dispensary. So yeah, fun, easy mistake to make.
Right. Well, and even here in the United States, things are different. I remember my first business meeting when we moved here. We now, moved from Colorado, and I had, except for a brief period of time where I was in school in Kansas, I'd always lived in Colorado, and so we moved here to the deep South. I mean, Atlanta is about as southern as you can get, even though we have so many people here from other places. But I go to my first business meeting, and everything came to a halt, and we prayed.
Oh,
and I was just so startled by that, because you never would have done that in Colorado. And, and of course I have learned that, I learned very quickly that, maybe you and I were just having dinner together. You might pray when the meal came here in the South. And so I learned not to immediately be putting food in my mouth. Just kind of take that little pause, all of these various things. And to me, it's a show of respect for the person, for their culture, for all of those things.
Absolutely. And you also want to pray, make sure the food's not poisoned.
I know. Yeah. And you never quite know sometimes. But yeah, it is something that I think many people, we all talk about the melting pot and things like that, but we're also still very proud of our specific cultures.
Or the tossed salad, maybe, if you know, you have
Yep.
ingredients.
And I mean, it is part of that building that relationship. If you remember, great example, you are Jewish, and so if I remember to send you some type of greeting on a Jewish holiday, that's just a little thing that you think, oh, wow. Did it take me more than 10 seconds to do? No. And I didn't. I'm sorry. I missed it.
We have lots of holidays.
Right. But I'm also, I'm somebody who's probably going to say Merry Christmas to most people, unless I specifically know that is not their faith.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting thing as well, from being out in the world as a sales guy and a marketing guy. When people say that to me, I just see it as a way of people being kind.
Right. It's like saying, how are you doing today?
Yeah. They don't need to know that I don't celebrate Christmas. No. Say thank you very much, and same to your lovely family. Why not?
Right.
No.
Right. Yeah. It's a well-meaning gesture.
Sure. And when a relationship goes further and people know individually, that's another good reason for having a relationship, because you can turn to someone they do celebrate Ramadan, and that they're going to be fasting. You're going to be cognizant of saying, hey, do you want to go to lunch tomorrow? No. Part of Ramadan, we're not obviously going to go to lunch. It's good to know that going in, right?
Well, and then to me, it gives a great opportunity to have more conversation, to say, oh, that's very interesting. Please tell me more. And so, yeah, again, you're just getting that little bit of education that's in there.
No, and I think you're right. And I think education, getting back to education, the reason I want to be involved in what I'm doing now is I love to be surrounded by educated people. I think in the US we have a very diverse group of people, and in the world. And it's fun to have people educated, because you can also have interesting conversations. We were fortunate to be on a call last night where we had interesting conversations with alumni from Atlanta about COVID, about what's going on in the world, CDC, lots of different businesses in Atlanta. And so I think that's really enriching, and that's obviously why I'm involved in what I do now. But I think that journey was interesting to get here because what we always had in common is I don't think people realize that being in a charity is really a business. I'm sure some.
Right. Oh yeah. There's not, I love it when people say it's a nonprofit. No, it still has to make money or it's not going to function. Like when I worked for the American Cancer Society, I believe we were the largest nonprofit in the world at that point in time.
That.
But we made money or we wouldn't have functioned. It just, it's how, and we had profit sharing. It's called something different. I don't remember what it is, but yeah, I mean, so a nonprofit has to make money or it doesn't function.
Yeah, when I told my wife and we discussed me going into the nonprofit world, one of her little jokes was, well, you already owned a nonprofit with your business. I'm like, yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
You have lots of nonprofit experience.
I hear that too. Oh.
There were years and years, right? So do you see giving as was it something you always thought about, or was it something that sort of you related to later in life?
No, my parents brought me up to be doing things. It was one of those things where it was probably the first thing would have been going to church and tithing.
Sure.
That would have been the first thing that I really thought about. And then just volunteering around the community. It's a very small community. Even though you have been in Colorado, have you ever even been up to Walden? It's really pretty small.
I have not been to Boulder. No one ever invited me.
I know. Well, we're hoping to be out in Colorado next month, and so we'll see if we can remedy this.
There you go.
But there were limitations. I mean, there certainly weren't as many ways to volunteer up there. But we were in Scouts. We did a lot of things, and so that was just always something that I did. And then. And fortunately I married someone who, in fact, he probably thinks about it more than I do. And he's very fortunate with the company that he works with. They do matching gifts. And so, and September is their month to do that. So he's been very busily doing all of those things and getting those done. But it really did. It was the conversation with you that started us really thinking about doing our will. I mean, that was one of the big things was to think about that. I did a will when I was diagnosed with cancer. It was like, okay, I needed to have my medical power of attorney. I needed to get my affairs in order. Right. But it was basic. It was one of those that I got off the internet, and basically it said Tom does and gets everything.
Sure.
And so it was very easy, which here in Georgia you can do. But it did start us, when we were talking with you, start us thinking about what we would do, because we don't have children. I always laugh and say we have lots of nieces and nephews, but none of them have sucked up enough to get anything. And so, we did start thinking about that process. We are at that age where we probably should have been thinking about things like that. In fact, we're probably past that age. But, it was something where we sat down with an attorney, because at that point we knew it was going to be more complicated, because we would be developing a trust, and doing several different things. And so, what did we care about and what were the things? And, CU was obviously one of the big things. And it's interesting. And I'm assuming most places work the same. You actually get a form from the university that you fill out, that you say, here's my intentions. And so that was what we did. And it was funny because, we go to dinner, we present you with our form. It was, this very funny thing. But, it really was something, as I said, that we had thought about, but we hadn't done anything about it. And that's the one thing that I want to encourage everyone, and who's listening or watching. Doesn't matter what age you are, just thinking about it, or, even writing it on a Post-it note doesn't quite count. Writing it down, yes, that is, that does make a legal difference, even if it is just on a Post-it note. But think about those things. Think about, if you have children, you need to think about, what you're doing with them. But pets, that's what happens to your pets if something catastrophic happens to you, and all of these things. But I did have to laugh when we were at CU and we went to an event for donors. And I was talking with one of the people from the foundation who I've known for many years. And he knew obviously that why we were there and what we had done. And I said, so Marcus, I have a question for you. I said, so if we both, my husband and I, die today, CU gets quite a bit of money because of the life insurance policies. And I said, but if we live a long time and really enjoy ourselves, CU might get 50 cents. I said, how do you and he looked at us and he said, the ultimate, and obviously I've remembered this, we wish for you a long but frugal life. And I just always thought that was so funny. Marcus is great, but it is something for people to be thinking about because, it's like we said, ours is primarily a life insurance policy. And so, that's something fairly easy to do. And I think a lot of people don't realize that if they get life insurance through their employer, they can designate, a nonprofit entity on that. It doesn't have to be a spouse, a child, a sibling, or whoever. I mean, you can put whoever you want on there. It's a little bit different paperwork, but yeah, you can do that.
No, and it's very interesting that two things. First of all, one, it may be slightly different from the business world is I tend to ask people permission to talk about financial matters and say, hey, the next time we meet, could we just have more of a business meeting and talk about fiscal matters? And people are usually up for that. Or they say, oh, no, not for me. And that's great.
They're just busy. Sorry, I can't see you this time. Sorry.
Exactly. Although people are very kind, I have to say. But I think that notion of giving is really important for many, many reasons. One, people are very generous. It's a very philanthropic country we live in. This is America, for whatever's going on around the world, it's a very philanthropic country. People are very kind. It's a little different in where I grew up, it's a welfare state, so people may feel they don't have to give as much, but they still give very generously. So with that in mind, I think that notion of giving, one of the things people always forget about is that if you leave money behind you, you're not organized, you know who's going to get that money.
Yeah, Uncle Sam.
Yeah. And many people don't want that to happen. I also am surprised how many times I hear from people, you know what, my kids and my grandkids very honestly are set. I have a niece I'd like to give a little bit to, or whatever, or a cousin, whatever it might be. But generally, I hear that quite often. Hey, we've been fortunate. Our kids have been fortunate. They live in nice homes. Obviously, some people give to their kids and they give a small amount to other institutions. But I think the key to what you're talking about, Deb, is that notion of it doesn't have to be cash. It can be life insurance. It can be, as we said before, an IRA. It can be whatever vehicle you want to use. We have had properties often willed to the University of Colorado and other charities I've worked in. It's pretty rare that people say, I'm just going to write you a check. Something hugely important to me personally is that notion of acknowledgement and thanks and stewardship. I don't like the notion of someone giving so generously, we never knew about it. It comes to the university, and this happens. Suddenly in someone's will, you go, well,
you get $20 million and you don't know who the person was.
Yeah, and I think it's lovely in someone's lifetime to show them, hey, these are some scholarship recipients right now. These are the sort of people you'll be supporting long into the future after you have sadly passed. And that's what I think people should deserve to have, that stewardship and that acknowledgement. And also, honestly, if I can be super frank, just like any business, when people are donors, they get more access to events and access to the higher ups, whatever it might be. They don't have to talk to me anymore. But it's a lovely thing to be able to thank people, really.
Right. And it's funny, when I first started volunteering for CU, I was having a conversation with someone from the foundation, and that was when I still worked at the American Cancer Society. And so I kind of had, a thought on this. And this person is no longer with CU, hasn't been there for a long time, but his philosophy was that you only really recognized big donors. Even if it was a plan giving thing. And my philosophy was the opposite. Somebody giving you $10. Now, yes, it takes time to thank them. And there are obviously, you're not going to thank a $10,000 donor the way you thank a $10 donor. I mean, but I said, if you don't acknowledge that $10 gift, that might've been their way of dabbling their toes in to see what would happen. And so that $10 donor, or, we mentioned, that all of a sudden you get the $20 million policy when somebody dies. Maybe they donated $100 a year, and it was just something that they did. They wrote that $100 check. Clearly something impressed them, or they wouldn't have done something major like that. But it is about that, acknowledging all of it. Even if it's an email, even if it's just a listing, somewhere, people want that. I got called on that earlier this week because we did just have our National Beagle Show, and we recognized our donors. And that was my responsibility. I was putting that together, and I forgot somebody.
Ooh,
And she called me on it. Now, it was very nice and very sweet, and her point was she just wanted to make sure that we actually got the money. I mean, that was the thing, and so that was very sweet of her. But I immediately went to our Facebook page and I did a mea culpa, and and I said, it was my fault, and it was $40, but it made her feel better. But yeah, she noticed that she hadn't been on the list. And so it is, it's those little things sometimes that really make a difference with somebody thinking, okay, well, this time it was $10, next time it'll be $100, and then maybe I will leave, the bulk of my estate.
What do you think about this notion in business of having some sort of stewardship program? I think if I were to start a business again, I would be thanking people much more.
Oh yeah, yeah. I love it when businesses get involved in their communities. And there's so many different ways that businesses can do it. Obviously, it depends. There's lots of different things that they can do. When I worked at ING, one of the big things that I managed there was their philanthropic program. Now they had a hefty budget, and this was quite a long time ago, and it was a hefty budget. So we were able to provide cash type of things, but one of the programs that meant the most to our employees they were math tutors to the nearby 8th grade. So
nice.
Maury Middle School. And I mean, we had people that they had been a math tutor the whole time they were at the company. And if we had said, we're not going to do that program anymore, it might have made them think, I'm not sure I want to work there. All it took was a couple hours out of every Wednesday or whatever that we did. And because it was something formally that we did, they weren't taking that as time off or anything like that. But, but clearly we weren't giving any money. I mean, there was not, but that was one of the programs that was valued the most. And that's what I think businesses now need to think about, because not everybody can write the checks. But how can you help? What can you do? Even if it's just, hey, we've got these computer monitors that, we're not using right now. Can we donate them? Now this is not the place to dump your old stuff.
Right.
We've all seen that happen, right? But, there are certainly ways where you can help. And it doesn't have to be monetarily.
No, and I think you're right. And I think that I'm fortunate enough to also be on the Children's Diabetes Foundation board, which is part of the Barbara Davis Center, CU Anschutz campus.
Right.
So it's fun. I would hate not to be involved. And, the university is very good about giving us time off. If I go to a board meeting, they're like, of course you should be going to a board meeting. When we're in the same sort of philanthropy business, of course you should be involved. And so businesses are really good about that. And I think my question was also a little bit about that notion of thanking in general in the private sector. So I think that I don't recall when I was in business that I thanked our customers enough. People spent money. I think we're really good at thanking people in the nonprofit world. We could still always do better. But certainly in the business world, I didn't think to say, who are my most loyal clients? What should I do for them? I think we probably thought, what do we do for them at Christmas? We invite them to a party, or we buy them a bottle of booze or whatever it was. Less fashionable to do that these days. But whatever it might be, don't you think that sort of those stewardship programs in the private sector would sort of go a long way to customers knowing that they were appreciated?
They would. We were chatting last night on a different Zoom call with a gentleman from Chick-fil-A. And of course, we brought up the fact that one of the things that they are all taught to do is they, whenever they're assisting you in the process, they end with, "It's my pleasure to serve you." And what I always like about it is almost always, not quite every time, but it is always sincere. And because there's that difference too. I mean, if somebody tosses my food and says, "Hey, it's my pleasure to serve you," I'm like, no, it wasn't. But if you always know it's coming, at least mostly from the heart, it's the same thing. So, and you're right. I think as business owners, as working for companies, whatever it is, we don't say thank you nearly enough.
No, and that's an interesting thing with the Chick-fil-A of the world. That's also a cultural phenomenon.
Right.
So if you spend your whole day saying it's a pleasure, that
Mhm.
eventually gets ingrained. Of course, it
Mhm.
becomes a pleasure
Right.
because it's just a positive attitude
Mhm.
around the place. And I
Mhm.
think that obviously we have that at the university when we see a young student succeed.
Mhm.
We have a student in our office who's a senior. He just got into a program in New York for his
Mhm.
master's. And, he comes from a home that's very, very poor.
Mhm.
We have another student that also came from a very
Mhm.
unfortunate background and has traveled to Colombia on a travel abroad program with help of scholarships.
Mhm.
And now is doing internships. He did it for First Bank, which is a
Mhm.
regional bank in Colorado last year. And I think now he's looking at Morgan Stanley for this
Mhm.
coming summer if it all works out with COVID. And this is a kid who, if you looked at him 5 years ago, you'd say, okay, hopefully he'll get into
Mhm.
college. And now we're talking about Morgan
Right.
Stanley.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's the wonderful things that can
Mhm.
happen with people being kind.
Mhm. Well, and it really does take so little. I go out to the post office or to the post office, to my mailbox yesterday, and there's this little card in there. And I'm like, there's no return address on it. So I'm thinking, okay, what politician is sending me something, right? And I open it up, and it's this cute little thank you card from somebody who attended the dog show last week, just thanking me for everything that I did.
Oh, how lovely.
And that was all it was. And now that little card will have a place of honor in my office, because part of it is we don't do that anymore. Now, we might say thank you verbally, we might send them an email, we might post on Facebook, whatever. But the fact that she took the, probably 5 minutes from start to finish process of write, and it was personalized. I mean, it wasn't just, and that always gets me when I get the thank you for my graduation gift. It's like, no, you can take the time to say what it was.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but yeah, I mean, the fact that she took the time to acknowledge that I had spent a lot of time working last week, that meant the world to me.
I think you're right. And I think that, part of my afternoon today
Mm-hmm.
is note cards.
Yep.
That's something I just tend to do. I don't know if it's an old
Mm-hmm.
fashioned thing. It's just something, as you know, I have horrendous handwriting. Could have been a pharmacist, except for the science skills.
Yeah,
Minor thing. But no,
that's
that's
what
a big part.
computers are for.
Exactly. But it's so interesting when we get handwritten notes
Mhm.
in the mail, it tends to be the first thing we open.
Right.
I'm not going to go, oh, great, it's a bill from public service. I'll open
Yeah.
that first. Oh, thank
Mm-hmm.
goodness. Or, that's a letter from
Mm-hmm.
the visa company.
Mm-hmm.
No, so if you get a handwritten note, it's going to
Mm-hmm.
be the first thing you
Mm-hmm.
notice and the first thing you open. And it's a departure these days to get those.
Mm-hmm.
So I think businesses could do a little bit better than that,
Right.
in that role.
Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting. I just bought 3 products from the same company, and I don't expect to hear from them, but it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting that I bought a lawnmower that has a big battery in it. And this
Ah.
company, their batteries work in all of their products. So I just
Mm-hmm.
bought a leaf blower from them. And now I just bought a snow blower from them.
Cool. Right. Smart
Um,
company that does that. Mm-hmm.
this one company who does it. But it's interesting that if they had a really good database, they're like, okay, guy in
Mm-hmm.
Colorado, we have 4 or 5 more products.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we marketed to him that we also
Right.
have
Mm-hmm.
whatever else we have,
Mm-hmm.
an edger or whatever we have for
Mm-hmm.
the garden. Um, or a chainsaw or whatever. I'm scared of chainsaws, so it wouldn't be that. But it'd be interesting if they had a
Mm-hmm.
sophisticated enough
Mm-hmm.
database to look and say, okay,
Mm-hmm.
we're not a giant thing, but here's a customer
Mm-hmm.
that's growing, and
Right.
I see
And
it on
here's a
social media.
discount for you.
Yeah, and if you do mind mentioning us on social media,
Mm-hmm.
as you know, I'm just like you. I have lots and
Mm-hmm.
lots of people on LinkedIn and lots
Mm-hmm.
on other social media platforms. So just interesting how businesses, how we feel when we sort of analyze it from the outside.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, how would I deal if I knew this guy was really becoming a big super fan
Mm-hmm.
about great products, by the way. I'm not
Right.
going to mention their names because they haven't written to me yet. So but
Yeah,
one day.
yeah, they haven't been nice yet. And I love it when people take the time, like on Facebook, to say, "Oh my gosh, I just went to this great restaurant," and give that little plug for them. It's earlier today I was dealing with the fact that one of my clients got a very negative review on Facebook, and I always tell people, do not ever, ever, ever ignore those. We have to respond. And even if it is just to say we're sorry, because in many cases you can't get into the details and you don't want to. I mean, you never want to get into a pissing match on social media with somebody. And most people just want to be acknowledged. They want to know that you heard them. And
Yeah.
so saying we're sorry that happened is what we need to do. And so,
Yeah.
this woman had this very negative review. And so we responded and said, we're sorry this happened. Please contact us. Now they never do, they just wanted to vent for that little bit. But then the best thing happened. Other people responded to that review in positive ways.
Nice.
And so, but it is, but we always take the time, whether it's a positive or a negative review, to thank somebody. Thank you for bringing that to our attention, or, all these various things. And, the same thing goes with all of these various things that we've got going on. If you went and had, a great meal at a restaurant, thank them. Whether, and clearly, it is sometimes a cultural thing as to, the younger generation is going to use one platform, and, they might say something on Twitter and, all these things. But, as a business owner, we love that. We love seeing those. But as we get those, thank those people also. Hey, thanks for saying such nice things about us. Because I'm not going to say something nice again isn't it funny? I'm not going to say something nice again if you don't acknowledge that I said something nice the first time.
No, I think that's great. And I think it leads us to another point from a business perspective, that acknowledging your staff, I soon realized, like in Aardvark, my computer business, I realized after a period of time, the way we're advertising, being out and about, getting new clients, I realized it was a little easier, although not easy, a little easier to get clients than it was to get good staff. So I wanted staff that had a computer interest but not a computer background. I wanted history majors and poli-sci majors, because we were often spending days at clients. We couldn't just have some sort of computer guy looking at his shoes.
Right. Yeah.
We had to have a social being. Well, with that in mind, cultivating that staff, you've got to thank your staff. I love giving the team I'm fortunate enough to lead right now, I love giving them credit. It's a lovely, lovely thing to do. And I think that acknowledging people, that positive reinforcement, is extremely important.
Right.
Retention's tough. I know, I know now we're in a different kind of economy, but it won't always be like this. I'm a bit of an optimist, in case you couldn't tell. And I think that if you want to keep, it's very expensive to hire people, very expensive.
Right. Oh, yeah.
So retaining people is huge. So my only other tip from the nonprofit world and the for-profit world is try and retain people by acknowledging them and growing them and nurturing them and helping them become.
Right.
I surround myself with people much smarter than myself, and then I look just fine.
Oh, yeah. Well, and it's more difficult now when we're not in the same offices. Everybody's on Zoom and home officing and all of those things. But quick little emails saying, hey, thanks a bunch. You send them a gift card for McDonald's for $5. I mean, all these little various things are great ways to acknowledge that somebody did a good job. And they don't even need it to be public. I mean, it doesn't have to be, that you're naming them employee of the month and, they get the good parking spot or whatever. Sometimes just walking into their office and saying, oh my gosh, Robert, thank you so much for going above and beyond this week. You have no idea how much we appreciated that. And that's the key is, as you said, it's the happy employees stay. Even if they could get paid better elsewhere or all of these various things. And you mentioned, educating them. Sometimes when you educate them, they leave, but that's okay because they left you in a better place and they're going to a better place.
Yeah, is that old notion, we always see that meme online about, what about if I educate and pay to educate these people and they leave? And you say, well, what about if I don't educate them and they stay?
Yeah.
Right? No, you don't want that.
Right.
And I think we're very right. Do you think that people are looking at ways of changing the way that they acknowledge people? We tease about the free space, the best parking space. Quite mute these days for most people who aren't.
Right. Yeah, gee, that's fun. I'm not going into the office.
Feel free to park in your own driveway.
Yes. We'll come put a sign in your driveway, right?
Exactly. So what do you think people are thinking about, not specifically, but about acknowledging people during a very different time? I mean...
and I think a big part of it is acknowledging that it is a difficult time for people.
Sure.
And so many people are having so many challenges because not only are they your employee doing, their little job, they've also got 2 kids that they're having to do, homeschool. They've got a spouse that's home, all of these various things.
Sure.
And so you're just telling them, oh my gosh, we understand how difficult it is for you right now. And let's be honest, I think many companies are being very fiscally strapped and very fiscally responsible right now, so sending everybody a gift card might not be a good thing.
Right.
But yeah, just sending them those emails or the handwritten note and saying, just wanted you to know that we're thinking of you. It doesn't matter what size company you have. You can sit down in the evening while you're watching TV and write a whole bunch of these notes. Again, they got to be personalized. It can't just be, you got to put their name on it. I hate it when you get something and it does, and I'm like, really? Did they even know who I was?
Yeah, to whom it may concern.
Yes. To whom it may be concerned. Thank you very much. Or then when the envelope is addressed by somebody different, that's always kind of one of those weird disconnects too. But I understand. I mean, a lot of times you give it to somebody and say, okay, now you take care of finishing all of this. But yeah, it needs to be, that personal note that says, Robert, thank you so much for working on X project, be specific, and all of those things. And then sign it, and yeah, I mean, it costs you whatever it costs to buy the thank you cards and however much it costs for stamps nowadays, and a little bit of your time, but they will remember it. And my guess is they'll show it to people. And, even if it's just their spouse and their kids and their dog, they're going to say, look what I got.
No, I think that's brilliant. So I think that people, first of all, this has been a delight, and thank you.
I know, and we're almost at the top of the hour. See, this is why I set a timer. We could be going on 4 hours from now.
Yeah, well, it's great. It's been lovely, and I really appreciate it. I think that the things, if it's okay, the sort of things I'd like to leave people with is that notion of what can we do during these times that are unprecedented. I think one of the important things is for people to pick up the phone. I think people are more likely to pick up a phone or if the phone rings, looks at it. We can see who it is. If it says scam likely, I'm like, oh, I don't think I want to put that.
Yeah.
But I think for the most part, even if it goes to voicemail, leave a very pleasant voicemail. Say, hey, was thinking of you, want to thank you for your custom. Thank you for being such a wonderful client. If you have 5 minutes to get back to me, I'm available at these times, and we'd love to have a catch-up conversation, see what we can do to help you or help one another. And especially from a networking perspective, I think people sort of discount the phone. I know the younger generation isn't quite into the phone, and that's fine too.
Right. But if I get a text saying thank you, that's just as good.
It is. It's great. And so if you're SMSing, texting, whatever one wants to call it, I think that's
somebody just sent you something right there.
There you go. Something just rang. Something just rang. Give me a reminder. It was my dog saying, "Why wouldn't you let me in before?" So no, I think that's it. Obviously, I think be kind, and I also think of institutions if you can that need help right now, because there's lots of organizations that need help currently, both in business. Send your, try and support small businesses. Try, if you're going to go out and eat or get takeout. Chick-fil-A is a wonderful organization, for example, so you can support, but also think about smaller organizations that need help right now. So that's one thing, both on the profit side and the non-profit side, and see what you can do to help, even if it's a small amount. And as you mentioned, that $40, it's important. Every $40 counts. I mean, it's $40 I didn't have before, and the Beagles didn't have before. So that's wonderful too.
Right. Yeah, I mentioned that we were just traveling, and one of the towns that we came through, somebody had sold yard signs. And it said, just be kind. And they were all over the community. I thought that was so great. And I really seriously thought about stealing one to put up here, which I'm thinking, okay, that's not the purpose of this. But if I had known where I could have bought one, I would have. Because, but it is, it's just right now, more than ever, we need to just be kind.
Yeah, and we know that you're dealing with an international audience here, which is lovely. So good day, good night, good morning to everyone, whatever time it might be. But people fundamentally are the same. They want to be financially secure. They want their families to be secure and happy and well and healthy. And so everyone really wants the same thing. It's just different cultures and different languages. But yeah, I agree with you. If we're kind to one another, and fundamentally the human beings are kind, there's going to be some outliers right there. But of course, and you and Tom were very kind to the University of Colorado, and thank you for that once again. I can say in public.
A long and frugal life to us.
Yes. No, a long and enjoy a life to you. It'll be fine. Whatever you get will be wonderful, and it's very, very kind of you.
Well, and I can't wait till we see Ralphie run again. You talk about donations. We bought our season tickets for football this year. We paid for them way back in January, and we transitioned that into a donation to scholarships. CU very kindly gave us multiple ways that we could make decisions with that money. But yeah, season ticket time comes, we'll buy it again. But yeah, again, there are so many ways that people can be involved. Be a mentor. I mean, to me, that is one of the best things that somebody can do. Or you'll call your university, call your business department and say, hey, I'd like to come. Would you be interested in having me as a guest lecturer?
Exactly.
All these various things. There's so many ways that people can give back that we just need to stop and think about things like that.
Yeah, and you have a very skilled audience, clearly, lots of different fields of work and experience, and I think that they could help in lots of different ways in nonprofits, in universities, in faith groups, whatever it might be that interests.
Right.
Please feel free to get involved in whatever way, and it will just be wonderful. And thank you all if you're going to do that.
Right.
I thank you all in advance for doing that.
Yes, for whatever organization, and it makes you feel good in here, which is, again, we need that right now. This is just trying times.
Yeah, and if it's okay with you, if people want to connect to me,
yes. How do they connect with you?
Well, they can connect with me, robert.garelick, Garelick, at colorado.edu. And I would be delighted. I also have a LinkedIn page at Robert Garelick, and I would be thrilled to hear from people if it's appropriate.
And he won't ask you for money. That's okay.
But I might.
Yeah, but it'll be further down the road.
Yes. You have to be patient.
Yes. Well, Robert, this really has been just so much fun, and getting to know you a little bit more and being able to talk about the things that we don't talk about when we're just having dinner.
Well, no, I appreciated the opportunity very much. It was lovely. You guys are a delight, and thank you for doing the show. It's amazing, and I'm glad I'll listen to more episodes now. I know, you see.
Yeah, you got a new podcast to listen to.
Perfect.
Well, this really has been so much fun. Go Buffs. And to everyone out there, I'm Deb Creer. Been having a wonderful time talking with Robert Garelick. And until next time, everyone have a great day.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.